My name is Maya Lennox. I sleep with the lights on. I double lock every door. And I move to a house at the edge of nowhere to escape something that still finds me in the dark. Everyone thinks I came here to heal. But the truth is, I came here to disappear. The cottage stood like a secret, half buried in ivy and shadow, too far from the nearest neighbor and too close to the woods. When Maya first saw it, something in her chest clenched. Not in fear, not exactly, but in recognition. It was the kind of place you ran to when the rest of the world became too loud. It was the kind of place that didn't ask questions. The realtor had spoken in hushed tones, almost as if the forest might overhear her. It's been empty for a while. People say it's too quiet out here. But with your situation, she didn't finish the sentence. Didn't have to. Maya had signed the lease that same afternoon. It had been 4 weeks since she left the city. 4 weeks since she'd walked out of the courtroom. Free, but not free. 4 weeks since the stalker, the man who had haunted her calls, her inbox, her sleep, was sentenced. 2 years suspended, the judge had said. No contact, mandatory therapy. 2 years? 2 years wasn't enough. 2 years wasn't safe. So she packed everything she owned into a rented SUV and drove until the GPS gave up. The road turned from pavement to gravel, gravel to dirt, and finally to silence. And there it was, her new beginning. Or her final retreat. She wasn't sure which yet. The first night was the hardest. Not because anything happened, but because nothing did. No cars passing by. No neighbors arguing through thin apartment walls. No distant hum of traffic or life or proof that the world kept turning. Just wind and trees and her own, breathing, loud in her chest like footsteps behind her. She lay on the mattress on the floor, the only piece of furniture she'd unpacked, with her flashlight beside her and the windows shut tight. She didn't sleep. By the second week, the silence started to shift. It wasn't just emptiness anymore. It had texture. Layers, like something was listening back. It started with a creak on the porch, then soft scuffing, like claws on wood. She'd get up, flashlight in hand, fling the door open, nothing. Only the night, still and blank as a closed eye. She told herself it was wind, maybe raccoons, maybe deer, but something about the weight of the sound didn't fit. It felt heavier, like something waiting. It was the third week when she saw the paw prints. She had just stepped outside to gather firewood, a new routine she was pretending. Made her brave, when she froze. There, in the thin layer of frost covering the porch, were 4 deep impressions, too large to be a fox, too wide to be a coyote, too distinct to be imagined. They led up to her front door, stopped, then turned around and vanished into the trees. Her hands trembled as she reached for the handle. The door had been locked all night. And yet, she had the sinking feeling she'd never really been alone. She started keeping the porch light on after that, every night. Small pool of gold in a sea of black. She knew it didn't keep anything away, but it made her feel like someone might see her if she screamed. Someone or something. 2 nights later, she saw the eyes. It was nearly midnight. She just turned off the hallway lamp and was about to climb into bed when something told her to look back. She did, and there they were, low to the ground, glowing faintly, not like glass, not like a reflection, but like something aware. She stood frozen. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move. She couldn't see the shape behind them, just darkness and breath. Then, as silently as they'd come, they vanished. She didn't sleep that night either. But this time, it wasn't fear that kept her awake. It was curiosity. By week 4, she stopped locking the outer storm door. She wasn't sure why. It didn't feel like surrender. More like invitation. She began leaving out scraps of food. Nothing major. Just pieces of meat, crusts of bread, boiled eggs. By morning they were gone, but the plate was never disturbed. Nothing knocked over. Clean. As if taken with care. She started whispering when she placed it down. "Who are you?" "What do you want?" "Why me?" No answers, of course. Just the stillness of the forest and the certainty that someone was listening. Then came the blackout. A sudden gust, a pop, and darkness swallowed the house like a mouth. Maya's heart stuttered. She scrambled for her phone, dead, flashlight, flickering, no signal, no charger, and worst of all, no light. She huddled in her bed, the covers pulled up to her chin, flashlight pointed at the ceiling. Time crawled. Her breath fogged in the cold. The wind moaned across the chimney like something alive. And then, she heard it. Not on the porch this time, not outside. Inside. Soft, slow, deliberate. The sound of claws on wood. Maya sat up, every nerve in her body alive with fear. The flashlight slipped from her hand, landed sideways on the floor. The beam pointed toward the door, nothing there, silence, then a low exhale. Warm. Near, right next to her. She didn't move, didn't breathe, couldn't. A heavy weight pressed against the side of her bed. Not aggressive, not sudden, just there, steady, real. She reached out slowly, hand trembling, not knowing if she was being brave or foolish. Her fingers touched fur. Thick, cold, damp. And still, not a sound. Not a growl, not a bark. Just presence. She didn't pull away, and the fear didn't spike. Instead, it dissolved, like smoke in the dark. And for the first time in a long, long time, she felt safe. In the morning, the power returned. The light was harsh after so much dark. She sat up, blinking. Alone. No paw prints. No fur. No open doors. But something had changed. Not in the room. In her. She walked outside. The plate was empty. But beside it, something new. A pine cone. Perfect, clean. Placed, like a gift. She looked out into the woods, whispered, "Thank you." No movement. But in her heart she knew. The room had been dark. But she had not been alone. They say animals know things before we do. Storms, earthquakes, people. Maybe that's why he kept his distance. Not because he feared me, but because he recognized the storm still living inside me. He watched. He waited. But he never came in. And somehow, that made me trust him more. The pinecone was still there the next morning. Maya didn't touch it. She just stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, the cool autumn wind brushing her face. The porch light flickered faintly behind her, even though the power had been back for hours. The house felt altered, not in any physical way. Nothing moved. Nothing broken, but something had shifted in the energy, as if the walls had inhaled deeply for the first time in years. She returned inside, but the door stayed open a crack. On purpose. Over the next few days, the silence outside grew less oppressive. Birds returned to the trees. The wind sounded less like moaning, more like breathing. Maya left food out every night. Not as bait anymore, but as ritual. A quiet offering, and every morning, always, it was gone. Nothing else touched. No trash scattered. No signs of struggle or scavenging. Just the clean, deliberate removal of whatever she'd left. She started calling him Shadow. It wasn't a name she said aloud often, but it lived in her thoughts. Shadow. The thing she feared, and the thing that now watched over her. Then came the first prints. Not on the porch, on the window. She had just made tea and was walking through the front room when she saw them. Faint, smudged marks near the bottom of the glass. As if something had stood on its hind legs, as if it had looked in. She stared for a long time, then touched the glass where the prints had been. They were cold, but not threatening, just curious. That night, the wind came hard. Not a storm, just a long, bitter howl that rattled the shutters and moaned through the trees like something ancient. Maya curled up by the fireplace, blanket around her shoulders, tea gone cold beside her. The logs cracked softly in the hearth. She tried to focus on her book. She couldn't. She kept looking at the door, then at the hallway, then back again. She felt it before she saw it, that shift in the air, that pressure, like being watched. But it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. She rose slowly, walked to the window, and there he was. Shadow. His large frame just visible in the flickering porch light. His eyes caught the glow, not in a reflective animal way, but in a deep, watchful way. He was lying down, head up, ears alert, tail still, not pacing, not sniffing, just waiting. She knelt on the floor, resting her chin on the windowsill. "I see you," she whispered. He blinked. Didn't move. "I'm not afraid anymore." Still, he didn't come closer. Didn't press against the glass. Didn't bark, didn't whine. He just stayed. And somehow, that meant more than any sound he could have made. For the next 3 nights, he returned. Always at the same time. Always in the same place. And always gone before dawn. On the 4th night, Maya left the front door wide open, not just unlocked. Open. She placed the food on the threshold, not outside, not inside, right in the middle. Then she retreated to the couch, left all lights off, and waited. Time passed. Shadows shifted. The house creaked in its old bones, and then soft footsteps, not fast, not loud, just deliberate. She held her breath. 1 step, 2. Then silence. And then the sound of food being lifted, not gobbled, not torn, but taken. Gently. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even look. Only after the wind whispered again and the presence faded did she rise. The food was gone, the plate unmoved, and at the edge of the doorway, something new. A feather. Small. Gray. Perfect. She picked it up carefully, pressed it to her chest. The 5th night was different. She woke from a dream she couldn't remember, heart pounding, throat dry. The room was cold, colder than usual. The fire had long since burned out. The cottage was wrapped in darkness. And she knew, without opening her eyes, that he was there, not outside, inside, not touching her, but near, so near. Her skin prickled. Her breath hitched, and then she heard it. The softest sound. Breathing. Steady. Rhythmic. At the foot of her bed. She didn't reach for the flashlight. She didn't move. She simply let the fear rise, then fall. Because it wasn't the kind of fear that screamed danger. It was the kind that whispered truth. That something real was in the room with her. Something that had chosen not to stay outside anymore. She whispered, "Shadow?" No sound, no response. but she felt him shift, as if her voice anchored him. She slid one hand off the bed, letting it dangle in the darkness. And after a moment, warmth. Fur, weight. He pressed his head against her palm, and for a moment, just a moment, the world made sense again. She must have fallen asleep like that, because she woke to light, warmth, and the sound of birds outside the window. Shadow was gone. But in his place, at the foot of her bed, was a stick, perfectly smooth, laid like a gift, a token, a bond. Maya stood at the doorway that morning and looked out into the trees. She didn't speak, didn't call. She didn't have to. Somewhere out there he was watching, and for the first time in months she didn't feel like prey, she felt seen. That afternoon, she unpacked the last box from her move, the one she hadn't dared open. Inside were photos, frames, things from her old life. One in particular caught her eye, a picture of her, younger, smiling, holding a golden retriever. Max, her childhood dog, gone for over a decade. She stared at the photo for a long time, then placed it by the window, beside the pine cone, the feather, and the stick. That night, when she stepped outside to place food on the porch, she heard it. A low, deep chuff. Not a bark, not a growl, just a greeting. She turned slowly, and there he was. Not hidden, not crouched, standing, head high, watching, waiting. She didn't speak. She just nodded once and stepped back, leaving the door open behind her. The room was dark. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. And yet, I wasn't afraid, because I could hear his breath, feel the soft pressure of his presence against the floorboards. I didn't need a light to know he was there. He was right, next to me, and somehow, that made me feel safer than I had in years. Maya awoke slowly, as if pulled gently from sleep by something other than noise. The fire had long died. The digital clock was dark. Power outage again. Outside, the wind sighed against the windows, pushing frost across the glass like icy fingerprints. The room was pitch black. But she wasn't alone. She didn't move. Didn't breathe too deeply, because she could feel it. Not danger, not fear. Presence. The old wooden floor groaned beneath a weight that wasn't hers, not creaking like age, not shifting like the wind, but soft, deliberate, real. Maya's pulse quickened, but not in panic. This sensation was different. Steady, familiar, like the low rumble of distant thunder that you've already made peace with. She turned her head slightly. Nothing to see. Nothing but dark. But she heard it. A soft exhale. Then another. Then a nose. Wet, cold, nudging the side of her mattress. And she smiled. Shadow, she whispered. The sound of her own voice in the dark surprised her. It didn't tremble. It didn't shake. It was quiet. Calm. Something brushed against her hand. Thick fur, damp from the cold. And then, heavier now, a body settled near the bed. A soft thump of weight against the wooden planks. He lay down. Close enough to feel. Far enough to respect her space. She rolled slowly onto her side, arm dangling over the edge of the bed. He didn't lick her hand, didn't press into it. He just let it rest there, hovering above him. She didn't sleep much that night, but for the first time she didn't mind, because she wasn't waiting for something terrible to happen. She was listening to the breath of something good that already had. By morning, he was gone, like always. Maya found herself staring at the space, where he had lain, not with sadness, with gratitude. She touched the floor once, pressed her palm flat against the boards, as if to say, "I know you were here." Then she went to the door and opened it wide, and laughed, because on the porch, right where the food bowl usually sat, was something unexpected. A glove. One of hers. She hadn't worn it in weeks. She checked the coat rack. Its match was still hanging from the pocket. She didn't know where he'd found it, or why he brought it, but she knew what it meant. He wanted her to know he could enter her world now, and bring a part of it back to her. Later. That afternoon, she cleaned out the small mudroom. She hadn't used it yet. It was always cold, cluttered, filled with leftover paint cans and tools. But now she swept the floor, laid down an old blanket, and placed a water bowl by the door. No expectations. Just a space, a choice, if he ever wanted to stay longer. That evening, the sun dipped behind the hills early, as it always did in October. Maya stood outside, arms wrapped around herself, breath fogging in the chilled air. She didn't call for him, never had, but he came. Shadow emerged like a story from the woods. His dark coat blended perfectly into the tree line. His eyes caught the dying light, not glowing like a predator, but reflecting something deeper. Recognition, memory, bond. He stopped at the edge of the trees. She stepped aside and left the door open. He came up the stairs without hesitation, sniffed the threshold, paused, then walked in. No fear, no resistance. He passed the blanket, touched the water bowl, but kept going until he reached the fireplace and lay down on the rug like he'd always been there. Maya sat on the couch beside him, knees pulled to her chest, and stared at the flames. She didn't talk, didn't ask questions, but she knew, without doubt, that something sacred had just shifted. Over the next week, Shadow's presence became part of the house. He never stayed through the day, always disappeared by sunrise. But every night, when the room went dark, he returned and always curled beside her bed. She stopped checking for paw prints. She stopped locking the door. She stopped dreading the quiet, because the quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with breath and warmth, and the sound of a large dog protecting something fragile. One night she found herself talking, not to him, but around him, to the air, the space, herself. "People think I'm okay now," she whispered. "Because I ran away. Because the judge said I could start over. But I didn't start over. I just stopped." Shadow shifted slightly. Maya kept going. "I still flinch when the phone rings. I still see his name in dreams. I still can't bring myself to open half the boxes in the closet." She pressed her face into her pillow. "And now you're here. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to let something close again." Shadow didn't move, didn't interrupt. He just remained. That was his gift. Not words, not comfort, but presence. He stayed. In the days that followed, she began to change. Not all at once, not like a revelation, but slowly. Like frost melting from the edges of a window. She started singing softly when she cleaned. She answered emails she'd ignored for months. She even wrote in her journal again, a habit she'd abandoned the night the man had followed her home. From work. One entry read, "He's teaching me silence isn't the enemy. It's the place where healing begins." Then one night, she woke up to something new. Shadow was beside her bed, as always, but his ears were up, alert. His breathing was faster, and Maya felt it too. The air in the room had changed. The wind outside had stopped. Total stillness. She sat up slowly, listened, and heard it. Crunch, snow, boots, Outside. Someone was walking, not on the path. Around the house. Her heart leapt, froze, then burned. Shadow growled, low and deep, like the earth itself answering the threat. Maya moved quietly to the window, looked through the edge of the curtain, and saw it. Flashlight beam. Moving too fast. Someone circling the back, looking for a way in. She didn't scream, didn't panic. She moved fast, opened the front door, and flipped on the porch light. Then she did something she never imagined she'd do. She stepped outside. The beam of the flashlight flickered wildly, then stopped. A shape, tall, bulky, paused near the edge of the woods, just watching, and then Shadow stepped beside her. No leash, no commands, just stood tall at her side. Still, silent, solid. The figure turned, ran, disappeared into the dark. Maya didn't move for a long time. She just stood in the light, with the dog beside her, heart hammering against her ribs. When she finally turned back inside, Shadow followed. And that night, for the first time since the cottage became hers, she locked the door not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to protect what was inside. You think you've healed, until something tests the walls you've built. Sometimes it's a stranger in the night. Sometimes it's a storm. And sometimes it's the decision to open the door, not just for someone else, but for yourself. The storm was announced in whispers. The radio crackled with warnings. Severe wind gusts, possible power outages, flash flooding in low-lying areas. But the forest had its own way of signaling danger. The birds vanished. The sky turned an uncanny shade of violet. The air itself tasted metallic, like something sharp was coming. Maya stood on the porch, coat wrapped tight, staring at the tree line. Shadow hadn't come the night before. She'd told herself it was nothing, but it felt like a gap, like part of her rhythm had missed a beat. Now the wind pushed against the house like a warning. Still, she waited. By dusk, the storm broke, not gradually, violently. Rain lashed sideways, slamming against the windows with such force she thought the glass might shatter. The trees bowed like servants. Thunder cracked directly overhead, splitting the sky in two. The lights flickered. Once, twice, then darkness. She lit candles by instinct now, one in each room, always one by the door. The food bowl sat untouched on the porch, already half flooded. And still, no Shadow. Maya paced the living room, flashlight in hand. She hated this. The not knowing. Not just because she feared something had happened to him, but because he had always been the one to stand beside her when things got bad, and now he was gone. She opened the door, just a crack. The wind nearly ripped it from her grip. She blinked through the rain. Shadow. She called into the dark. Her voice was lost instantly. She stepped outside. Rain soaked her hair, her shoulders, her socks. She didn't care. She stepped off the porch. One step, then another. Shadow. No answer. No sound except the storm. Then, movement. Something in the trees. Too fast to see. Too quiet for a deer. She froze. Lightning split the sky, and there he was, soaked to the bone. Eyes wide, covered in mud and brambles. Shadow. He stood at the edge of the trees, shaking. Not in fear. In pain. In hesitation. He looked smaller somehow. Diminished by the elements. Beaten down. But still standing. Still watching her. "Come in," Maya shouted over the rain. "Shadow, come here." He didn't move. She took a step forward. "Please." Another crash of thunder. He flinched. Took a step back. "No, no, no." She dropped to her knees in the mud. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. Her voice cracked. Don't be afraid of me. For a second, everything paused. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath, and then he stepped forward, one foot, then another, then all at once. He ran, straight into her arms. He nearly knocked her over. He was heavier than she remembered. Wetter. Warmer. He buried his head in her shoulder, and for a moment she felt his entire body shake. Not from cold, but from release. He had come. Through the storm, through the fear, through whatever had held him back all this time. He had chosen her. She led him inside, shivering. He paused at the door again, just briefly, as if taking one final moment to decide. Then he crossed the threshold. No hesitation this time. No retreat. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and the storm screamed against the windows. Locked out. She wrapped him in a blanket. Not because he needed it, but because she needed to do something. He let her dry his fur. Didn't flinch, didn't move. Just lay there, eyes half closed, like a warrior who had finally reached shelter. She lit the fire again. It sputtered at first, but caught. Warmth returned to the room, and for the first time since she moved in, the house felt full. Later, she made soup, not just for herself. She filled a second bowl and placed it beside him. He didn't touch it immediately, just watched her, until she sat down. Then he ate, one bite at a time. No rush, no fear, just trust. When the power blinked on an hour later, Maya didn't even notice, because she was curled on the floor beside him, hand resting gently on his side. He was asleep. Safe. So was she. But the night wasn't finished. At 3:12 a.m., a sharp bang jolted her upright. Not thunder. Wood? The back door. Maya's. Heart stopped. Shadow was up in an instant. Low growl in his throat. Not loud, but deadly. Maya grabbed the flashlight and moved toward the hallway. Shadow pressed beside her, shoulder brushing her leg. Another bang, this time harder. Then, crack. The back door had been forced open. The wind howled in, and so did something else. Not a person. A branch, thick and broken, had slammed against the doorframe, prying it loose. The storm hadn't given up yet. She stepped forward, heart thudding. The door creaked on its hinges, then stopped. A low groan from the outside, and a flash of movement. Something small. Animal? A blur shot through the gap. Maya gasped. Shadow bolted after it. The flashlight caught it just in time. A dog. Tiny. Soaked. Shivering. A puppy. Crawling across the floor like it had no strength left. Shadow froze. Didn't bark. Didn't growl. Just stared. Then looked back at Maya and whimpered. Maya moved first. She scooped the trembling thing into her arms. Wet fur. Visible ribs. Eyes wide with terror. Shadow circled them once, then lay down, head on his paws, as if to say, I know what that feels like. She spent the rest of the night drying the puppy, feeding it broth, wrapping it in old towels. Shadow didn't leave her side. Didn't move until the storm had passed, and the sky began to lighten. And when the first golden line of morning crept through the clouds, Maya looked around at her cottage. One dog asleep beside the fire, one pup curled on her lap, and her own heart, finally still. She whispered into the room. You brought him, didn't you? Shadow didn't reply, but she saw it in his eyes when he lifted his head. Not pride, not ownership, but purpose, as if he'd passed the test, as if now they were ready, not just to survive, but to live. The lights went out again last night. But this time, I didn't freeze. I didn't scramble for flashlights or check the locks twice. I just sat there, in the dark, and listened. And when I heard his breathing beside me, I realized something I never thought I'd feel again. I wasn't afraid. Not of the dark. Not of the silence. Not of the past. The morning after the storm, Maya woke to stillness. But not the kind she used to fear. The house felt full, lived in, breathing. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, slicing across the floor in warm ribbons. The fire had gone out sometime before dawn, but the lingering heat still clung to the stone hearth. Shadow was there, sprawled out on his side, massive and peaceful, his nose twitching slightly as if caught in a dream. And beside Maya's bed, wrapped in a towel and snoring softly, was the puppy. Leo. She'd named him Leo just hours ago, almost without thinking. The word had spilled from her lips like it had been waiting there all along. Maya sat up slowly. She'd never had two animals in her house before. Never shared her space this way, but it didn't feel like a violation. It felt right, like the house had been built for this. Not isolation, but belonging. Later that day, she drove into town. Shadow stayed with Leo, curled protectively around the smaller body like a guardian. Maya returned with dog food, blankets, 2 collars, and something she hadn't thought she'd ever want again. A small handmade sign from the craft store that read, "Home is who's beside you when the lights go out." She hung it near the front door, then stood back and stared at it for a long time. The days that followed passed like dreams. Leo gained strength quickly. He followed Shadow everywhere, mimicking his every movement. He tripped over his own paws, barked at firelight, and tried to chew everything in sight. Shadow never scolded him, just corrected him silently, a low grunt here, a sidestep there. Always patient. Maya laughed more than she had in a year. She cooked. She opened the windows again. She stopped checking the locks 3 times before bed. But the past doesn't like to be left behind. It always knocks one last time, just to see if the door will still open. It happened on a Thursday. Cold, clear, quiet. Maya had taken Leo out for a short walk in the early evening. Shadow had stayed behind, resting near the fire. As she walked back toward the cottage, Leo clumsily chasing leaves, she saw it. A figure, standing just beyond the tree line, still, watching. She stopped, heart halting mid-beat. She wasn't imagining it. Someone was there. Too far to identify, too close to ignore. She scooped Leo into her arms and ran. Shadow met her at the door, instantly alert. He must have known. He sniffed her, then turned toward the trees, growled. Low, deep. Not loud, but with a weight that said, "This ends here." Maya locked the door, closed the curtains, called the sheriff. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled. "I think someone's been watching the house, just now, from the woods." The sheriff promised to drive by that night. And he did. Floodlights passed across her windows around 10 p.m. She saw them, but she didn't feel safer, because she knew the ones who watch from shadows don't fear sirens. They fear light, real light, the kind you carry inside. That night, the power went out again, just like before. Maya sat on the couch in the pitch black. Leo curled at her feet. Shadow sat upright by the door, like a sentry. She didn't reach for a flashlight, didn't move, just closed her eyes and breathed. Then, a noise, soft, deliberate, from the porch, footsteps, human. She stood slowly. Shadow growled again, louder this time. She put her hand on his back. He stilled. The door handle jiggled, once, twice, then a voice. Slurred, familiar. "You're not safe here alone, Maya. The voice from her nightmares. The man from the trial. The one the system said would. Stay away, but paper doesn't stop footsteps. Maya didn't scream, didn't cry. She opened the door. Slowly. Shadow stood beside her, massive and silent. And there he was, soaked from the cold, eyes wild, hands shaking. He opened his mouth to speak again, but Shadow stepped forward. Just one step. No snarl, no attack, just presence. And the man froze. His eyes flicked from Maya to the dog, then to the smaller dog beside her, then back again. And he laughed. A hollow, broken sound. I just wanted to talk. No, Maya said. She took a step forward now. She wasn't hiding behind Shadow. He was standing with her. She raised her voice. You don't get to talk. Behind her, Leo barked, high-pitched, innocent, fierce, like a second heartbeat. The man took one last look and backed away. No threats, no promises, just retreat. The kind you make when you finally realize the door you used to walk through isn't yours anymore. Maya closed the door gently, locked it once, just once, then turned back to her dogs. She sank to the floor, buried her face in Shadow's fur, and laughed. Relieved. Free. Later, she sat in the dark again. No lights, no candles, just the natural quiet of a home that had nothing left to hide. Leo snored on the rug. Shadow rested near the door, always near the door, but never outside of it again. Maya whispered, I used to think the dark meant something bad was coming. She reached for the blanket beside her. But now I know. Sometimes it just means something good is already here. The room was dark, and he was right next to her, not to protect her, not to save her, but to witness who she'd become. And that made all the difference.